Hey everybody, this is Coach K. Coach K talking real hoops, and this is episode 5. I wanted to take a little break from talking about coaching, right? And I want to talk about this GOAT conversation that everybody has in every sport, greatest of all time in whatever sport it is, and then this Michael Jordan versus LeBron conversation. So it's two parts, the GOAT conversation and then MJ versus LeBron, because every time I turn on ESPN, that's what they're talking about. Social media, everywhere. So I want to talk about those two things. Number one, the greatest of all time. I don't like when people use that because I don't think there is a greatest of all time. I think you could be one of the greatest in your era because these guys did not play against each other, right? So number one, the major point is this. I watched a PBS special about Jack Johnson. People that don't know who he is, he's the first African-American heavyweight champion. He became heavyweight champion when he was 30, but at the time for 8, 10, 12 years, he was one of the best teenage boxers. So like, I believe Mike Tyson's the youngest heavyweight champion of all time, but guess what? Jack Johnson really could have been because the white heavyweight champion would not allow and would say publicly, I'm not going to fight using the N-word, right? And when he finally got a chance to fight the white heavyweight champion, Jack Johnson destroyed him, right? So number one, certain demographics of people, non-white people, were not allowed to play professional sports in a major professional sports, from baseball, basketball, football, right? Until Jackie Robinson came around. So number one, why I don't like the GOAT conversations is anybody who wasn't white wasn't allowed to participate in the major professional sports, or they made Jack Johnson wait years in order to get a shot at the title, right? So that's number one. Number two is every era is different. Every era has different rules. The era today in basketball and football, they want to make things more safe, but these rules really have the advantage for the offensive player or team, right? So their statistics are inflated, but I like to use the word inflated, but a basketball player, James Harden, averaging 37 points a game today would not average 37 back in the 80s. The two-hand hand check became illegal in 2004, and I'll go over that later. But the GOAT conversation, number one, until Jackie Robinson in the 1940s, non-white people were not allowed to participate in major sports. And number two, every era is different. So I don't like to use the term greatest for any particular sport, because these players were not allowed. They can't play against each other, right? And that's my main argument why I don't like using the GOAT conversation. But going to the GOAT, even some history. Back in the 1930s, there was a team. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar did this documentary. It was called the Harlem Wrens, and it was an all African American basketball team, and they were awesome. And in the 1930s, they're like, we'll take on the world champion Boston Celtics of the 1930s. They played 8 games. The Harlem Wrens beat them, the Celtics, who were world champs, 7 out of 8 games. 7 out of 8. Then you have guys like Satchel Paige, professional baseball player. He pitched in the Negro Leagues, right? And then also he pitched in the Major League Baseball once it became integrated, right? He was pitching when he was 48, 49. So imagine he was allowed to participate in Major League Baseball that whole time. What would his statistics look like, right? Then you go into basketball. Once they integrated professional basketball in particular, there was an unwritten rule that only 2 African Americans can be on one NBA team. The Boston Celtics, they had a Jewish coach, Red Auerbach, and he didn't give a darn. He wanted to win. And they were the first NBA team to start an all-5 black team. All right. And they were winning championship after championship with Bill Russell, 11 out of 13 years, right? So, the GOAT conversation is that's all I'm going to touch about that as far as why I don't like using the GOAT conversation. All right, now into the juicy stuff. All right, the Michael Jordan versus LeBron debate. People that know me, I've never seen a basketball player like Michael Jordan. My daughter's named after Michael Jordan. Her name's Mackenzie Jordan. My wife and I are huge Michael Jordan fans. And I'm going to try to be as unbiased as I can because at the end of the day, LeBron and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar will be the two most accomplished NBA basketball players as far as winning titles, up there, for statistics. Like, LeBron might pass Kareem as all-time leading scorer. LeBron might be top 5 in assists. Kareem is the most accomplished as far as from high school to NBA. I mean, winning high school championships. He won 3 at UCLA, but people don't know this. Back then, they didn't allow freshmen to play. It was a rule by the NCAA. The freshman team with Kareem beat the UCLA varsity squad, and UCLA won the national championship that year. Then Kareem wins 6 NBA championships. So Kareem and LeBron, at the end of the day, when LeBron's career is done, those two guys would be the most accomplished as far as winning titles, statistics, right, all-time stats, and the longevity of their career, how long their NBA career spanned, right? But when you are talking about how good somebody is, there's a few things that come to mind. Number one, did they dominate the game in their era? And there's certain guys that they literally were so dominant that they changed the rules, or teams put unwritten rules around them. Like, for instance, Will Chamberlain, he was so dominant. And by the way, his name should always be in the conversation of greatest of all time. One of the greatest of all time, right? It's not just one. Most points in the game, 100. Most rebounds in the game, 55. Averaged 50 points in a season. The guy was 7'1". You should YouTube him. He did track at UCLA. And the high jump, you go backwards and jump, you're back first. This guy would hurdle the high bar that you would do a high jump, which was incredible. He's one of the most unbelievable athletes ever in NBA. This guy, 42-inch vertical leap. He could bench press well over 600 pounds when he was in his 40s. He was playing professional volleyball late in his 40s. And he could run. He could run up and down that court fast. Just dominant. So when you are mentioning like who's one of the greatest, Will Chamberlain's name always has to be mentioned up there. And I know he didn't win a lot of championships, and that's another thing. Championships shouldn't be the end-all, be-all. Robert Horry got 7 world titles, more than Michael Jordan. Does that make him better? No. But look at Bill Russell. Bill Russell's name also should be up there. 11 championships in 13 years. He came to my college, and I had an extra ticket, invited my dad, and after Bill Russell talked for 2 hours, to this day, my dad and I said, I've never seen a public speaker in person speak about what makes a successful team. And you wonder why. We knew why he won 11 championships in 13 years. He was all about winning and team and saying, and a family's a team, a business is a team. And he knew, could Bill Russell bring the ball up the court? Yes, he did. But he knew his role. I'm going to give it to the best point guard in the league at that time, Bob Cousy, and let him handle it because he can handle the ball better than me. But going back to Bill Russell, their starting 5, all All-Stars, all Hall of Famers, the Jones boys, Bob Cousy, Russell. Then you got Tommy Heinsohn come off the bench. But who came off the bench in Bill Russell's a lot of his years? The Celtics all-time leading scorer, John Havlicek. So they were stacked. And Wilt Chamberlain had to deal with this year after year after year. And he shouldn't be penalized for not winning a lot of championships because look who he's running against. Look who he's playing against. He's playing against the Celtics with a stacked team, one of the greatest teams of all time. And 8 championships straight. How hard that is to keep winning at the highest level year after year. So number one, did you dominate the game in your era? And did it change the rules? So going back to Will Chamberlain, They made two rules, changes in rules because of him. They made the lane wider because he would just catch it from outside the lane, just turn around and dunk. Secondly, you, as a free throw shooter, second shot, you have to hit the rim, right? If it's NBA. He used to throw the ball off the backboard, jump from the free throw line, and dunk it. They changed those two rules because of him. Dominance. Look at Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. They outlawed the dunk because of him in college. And it was probably a blessing in disguise for Kareem because he developed that hook shot. Dominance. Michael Jordan. Let's go to Shaq. Shaq's another one. Shaq, he was putting up 35, 15 every finals. Close to 40, actually. That's repeat. And all of a sudden, the NBA is like, he's just too dominant, too big, too strong. All of a sudden, they just they rewarded flopping. And from Vlade Divac and anybody else who was guarding Shaq, they just started allowing flopping. And I see it too much in today's game. Fouls that are not fouls. And the officials are looking at the reaction of the defensive player flopping back. I saw in the finals this year, and it's getting worse and worse. So Shaq's another one, dominant. Michael Jordan. They had the Jordan rules, the bad boys. They said the only way we could really stop this guy is basically destroy him before he gets up in the air. And when he does get up in the air, clobber him. I don't see there's probably other guys, right, that maybe they change rules or they have people have game plans for superstars, but literally changing rules and literally calling Jordan rules. I don't hear that for LeBron. They would say, hey, when he does get to the basket, foul him because he's not a good foul shooter. Giving the mid-range for LeBron because his mid-range game isn't as great, right? And I'll go over weaknesses of LeBron and Mike later on, but between Michael Jordan and LeBron, as far as there's no LeBron rules, right? There were Michael Jordan, there's the Jordan rules. So did you leave a blueprint in your era where they had to actually change rules, or the Jordan rules, right? A second major topic is, did you dominate the other stars? I mean, totally dominate. Michael Jordan, by his second year, he had a major injury. Sat out most of the year. He played maybe the last 10 or 12 games, or 15 games of regular season, and they did minutes restriction. Once they got to the playoffs, Mike's like, he told management, you're not putting me on minutes restriction. Mike was all about winning. And I hear this stuff, oh, Michael Jordan lost in the first round this many times. Yeah, first of all, after his rookie year, he was never outscored in the playoffs by any other opponent. But not only that, he never got outplayed. Never got outplayed by whatever superstar. So one of the greatest teams of all time, the 86 Celtics, 5 Hall of Famers, one of the greatest front lines ever. You had Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale, Larry Bird, and then, oh, by the way, you're bringing Bill Wallen off the bench, Hall of Fame center. Then you got DJ at the point, and Danny Ainge, who was an all-star, solid player. Mike had nobody, literally nobody. He scored 63 playoff record versus that team. And then the next game fouls it up a 49. So, yeah, they're like, oh, Michael Jordan lost in the first round this many times, LeBron didn't. Who did LeBron face in the first round? And number two, what does that even matter? What does that matter if you lose in the first round? It doesn't. And when you get to the finals, what do you do when you get to the finals? Do you dominate the other superstars in the finals, or do your teammates call you a quitter, like Eddie House did to LeBron after the Mavs finals? So every superstar that Jordan went against, he dominated them. From Larry Bird, then he faces Magic Johnson in the finals. In the media, they're like, oh, Michael's only a scorer. Put up over 30, averaged 11.4 assists in the finals versus Magic and beat him. Clyde Drexler, in the media at the time, and I remember that finals as a young kid, scores 35 points in the first half, NBA Finals record versus Clyde, 6 threes. Michael Jordan was not known as a three-point shooter. He dominated Clyde. Anybody that said, oh, Karl Malone got the MVP, a regular season MVP when they met in the finals. Jordan dominated them. Every superstar, Jordan would dominate. Didn't matter when it was, from second year in the league all the way to 98. Now, granted, when he came back to Washington Wizards, he was old, late 30s, early 40s, took a couple, right, 2-3 more years off from basketball. But I'm talking about your prime. Did you dominate the other superstars? And Michael Jordan dominated every single superstar he went against. LeBron, not so. I mean, no, are you kidding me? By the way, 8 points in a finals game. If you had 8 points, it better be 15 or 16 assists like Magic Johnson would do. 8 points versus JJ Barea. Think about that. The guy's like 5 foot, and I remember watching that game. All you had to do, Michael or Kobe, put him down for 40, 50 versus JJ Barea. Michael would have put up 50 versus JJ Barea when he was in Washington. And that's one of the difference between Mike and LeBron. Mike's he's gonna impose his will and dominate you. That Mamba mentality. Kobe was already cut from the same cloth as Michael Jordan when he came into NBA, and Mike and Kobe had that big brother, little brother relationship. Mike just enhanced that. Kobe already had that. That's one of the things that Jerry West saw in him, that competitiveness, that fire. I'm going to go at whoever it is, including Michael Jordan, when Kobe got in the league. I'm going to go at him. LeBron does not have that mentality. But number two, even some people will say, oh, Kevin Durant outplayed LeBron in the finals, right? Kawhi Leonard outplayed LeBron in the finals. They never said that about Michael Jordan. Jordan dominated every single superstar every single time. Now, are you going to have bad games here or there? Absolutely, regular season. I'm talking about when it matters most, the playoffs, the finals. Did you dominate those superstars? And it's not just points, right? Because Magic Johnson, my favorite point guard I've ever seen, the best passer I've ever seen, right, in person, and there's been other great passers. But Magic, he'd rather get 15, 20 assists, and he'd be fine with 0 points with a W. So number one, did you change the rule? Did they change the rules or make rules against you, right? Did you dominate the other superstars? And LeBron hasn't done that consistently like Michael Jordan has, right? And I want you to think about going back to dominating the game and changing rules. They did that to Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods was winning major championship after major championship, and they started changing the golf course, to hinder his performance. Bob Gibson, people that are baseball fans, he was so dominant one year, the pitching mound was raised up. Well, because he was so dominant that one year, they had to lower the pitching mound because his ERA was well under 1. Dominance. And did you dominate your opponent? Every single time you met, maybe even a regular season, right? And it's fine you have a bad game, but when it's the playoffs, it's a series, and it's the finals, that's a huge difference between Michael Jordan and LeBron. Their consistency of dominating those other superstars, and consistency of just looking like the best player on the court every single time, every single series. And LeBron's finals versus the Mavs, I'm sorry, but he averaged 17 a game. One game, 8 points versus JJ Barea, and Dirk outplays him, finals MVP. That's and I have a hard time putting LeBron up with Mike for that major reason, is the dominance of the superstars. All right. Still going, because I wrote down some notes because I want to cover all of them, and because both of them deserve. By the way, LeBron and Mike are different players, as we know. Michael is, I'm going to drop 40, 50. And that's what his team needed him to do. Because Scotty he even said he took that role away from Mike. And Mike didn't have, I'm going to go over that later, but Mike didn't have 2 teammates on a team that could get you 20 every game, right? Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving going to get you over 20. Miami, Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade. Mike never had that. Tony Kukoc, career 14 points a game. Steve Kerr, 8 points career game. Dennis Rodman, 5 points career average. Even Scottie Pippen, it's like 17.7 points per game average. Mike had to drop 40, 50 a lot of games. He did not have the help offensively. Didn't have the help offensively like LeBron has on the offensive side of the court, right? But looking at another area, statistics. The rules are so different today than years ago. And I don't look so highly on statistics, and we can with those two. Mike got more scoring titles. He got more first team all defense. But as far as statistics, like each year or each category, there's other factors with that, right? Ted Williams, he lost almost 6 years in his prime because of the war. Like if he played those 6 years, he would have been, the hits, the home runs, he'd be at the top of the list. And when you say who's one of the greatest hitters of all time, you say Ted Williams. Michael, the same thing. Michael didn't care about being first all time in scoring. He didn't care about he just wanted to win. And he always measured himself up against the guys in his era. He's like, you know what? Magic and Bird never three-peated. That's what I want to do. They never three-peated. I want to do that. And he did it twice. Just because Magic and Bird never did that. So Mike he's just about winning. And I know LeBron wants to win too, but at the end of the day, if you say, oh, LeBron's first in all-time scoring and top 5 in assists, therefore he's better than Mike. Or he's 6-0 in the finals, LeBron's 4-6, right? And Mike never let Game 7 happen. It's not just one thing. But with statistics, the football and basketball today, the numbers, if you want to use the word inflated, great. There's some rules that exist today in NBA that didn't exist years ago. Number one, the two-hand hand check. That existed Michael Jordan's entire career. Anyone that's a basketball player, try going by somebody with two hands on their body. It doesn't exist today. I heard somebody say, if you breathe on somebody, they'll call a foul. Even when I teach my guys, when an offense player has the ball and you're playing defense, that area, that space in between the defense and offense, number one, you got your hand up and their shooting hand, right? So, but the other hand, you could put it out there to kind of reach for the ball. I think about this. I have seen guys playing James Harden with both hands behind their back. That just speaks to the different style of eras. From the bad boys, two-hand hand check. In a game, I believe it was Robert Parrish punches Bill Laimbeer in the face. The official season says play on. Think about that. The stuff that guys are being tossed out or flagrant ones, flagrant twos, those are common fouls years ago. Literally common fouls. And it's not, and I can't compare LeBron off that. I'm just saying it's a huge factor. How would he have handled that? I know how Chris Paul would play back then. I know how Marcus Smart would play back then. I know how Draymond Green, they are physical basketball players. But there's certain guys, I don't think Steph would be putting up 30 in the 80s with two hands on him all game. Isaiah Thomas, what would he do in today's era? His numbers will be a lot higher. So the statistics, you just cannot go solely on statistics because the eras were so different, the rules were so different, and that's why I'm not a huge fan of just, okay, well, look at this. This guy averaged more than him, and he got more career points. The stats are inflated today, and I can't say that's not a knock on the players today, but how would they have handled going to the basket and getting clotheslined by one of the bad boys? Would they go to the basket again, or would they just settle from the outside? How would they handle with two hands on their body the entire game? So statistics is another area, but be careful when it comes to statistics, all right? Now, MJ versus LeBron. Some of the things I want to put down to break down them even more is the first one, talked about how did you dominate the stars of your era. LeBron hasn't dominated the stars. I think that's one of the biggest criteria. He hasn't dominated the stars in his era like Michael Jordan has. Michael dominated every single star. Larry Bird called him God in basketball shoes after he dropped 63 versus the 86 Celtics. Magic, he even said, he's like, Jordan was the best player, but he just didn't have the horses. He didn't have the help. And for someone to say, well, Michael didn't win until Scottie got there. What guy has literally won it by themselves in any era? It's so hard to do that. You do need some help. Basketball is a team sport. It's not an individual sport. If you're talking tennis, yeah, it's an individual sport, singles. And when you say who's better, Roger Federer or Nadal, well, they both have, and that's a little bit easier to compare those two because they're just going at each other. They played in the same era, went at each other. Nadal's record versus Federer is he has a winning percentage against Federer. And if people say, well, Federer got more Grand Slam titles, I think he does. I think it's only by 1 or 2, but Nadal has beat him more times than Federer's beat Nadal. But basketball is a team sport. Football is a team sport. So, but how did you dominate those stars when you played them in your era? And Mike has always dominated. And look at what Magic said. Look what Magic said about Mike. Look what Larry Bird said. And this was back in the 80s. This was back in the 80s. The other thing, and this is my number one, is I hear these people on talk radio. They never played in the NBA. Never, including me. But I also listen to what did the coaches say? What did the other players say? So the second factor is this, which is right up there with comparing these two. They gave a little survey, or they asked 20 NBA coaches and GMs that are around in the 80s all the way till the 2010s, I believe. And they said, Mike in today's era, this was somewhere in the 2010s, they said Mike would average 45 in today's rules. And he would. Imagine Michael Jordan playing versus the Houston Rockets in the playoffs this year. No hand check. So once he goes by somebody, Mike got a 48-inch vertical leap. He runs a 4.3 40 in his prime. All the coaches and players talk about how strong Michael Jordan is and how strong his hands are, but no rim protection. No rim protection. It's crazy. You know, imagine some of these great guards, Jerry West, Michael Jordan, Isaiah Thomas. That's a huge factor. Anybody that's a ball player, when you go by somebody, you know, for me, I had a great mid-range jump shot. I wouldn't have to do a lot of mid-range jump shots playing in an era like today where a lot of teams is 5 guards out there. Gosh, I could post up. I could go to the basket more, get to the free throw line more. And like I said, it's not fair to knock LeBron because LeBron would have been great in a previous any era. But I'm just saying when these coaches and GMs that saw Mike all the way from when he started and then today's era, it's 2 different eras. And Mike would average 45 a game in this era. No hand check, no rim protection, the quickest first step, right? Will LeBron be great in the previous era? Yeah, he would. But I don't know how he would have handled the bad boys. I have an idea, but I don't know how he would go to the basket. Would he keep going to the basket or just settle from the outside? All right. So that's the second point. What the coaches and GM say about Mike, and that's what they say about him. Thirdly, is the other players, the other NBA players. When you hear Jalen Rose, he's like, there's only 2 guys I ever played against. They were the best player on both sides of the ball, Michael Jordan and Hakeem Olajuwon. The best offensive player and the best defensive player. But also go to Shaq, KG, Ray Allen, who played in Michael's era towards the end and also played against LeBron. And who do they say is better? They say Mike. So what do the other NBA players, the stars, say that played against or with both of those stars? And by the way, Ray Allen was a teammate of LeBron James. And Ray Allen's like, Mike is better than LeBron, mainly because he can dominate the game at any point, especially at the end of the game. He's going to score from the outside. He's going to score from the mid-range, and he's going to get to the free throw line and make it 84%. LeBron, he defers a lot. I'm not saying that's a disadvantage, but LeBron cannot dominate offensively like Mike can. And if LeBron doesn't have the teammates around him making shots, you're in trouble. But know that whatever team Mike's on in his prime, he will get you buckets at the end of the game. LeBron doesn't do that consistently. He needs somebody else to do that a lot of times if his shot's not falling. And that's a huge weakness. If you get fouled and you're a 60-something% foul shooter, that's a problem. So third point, what did the other stars say? Stars that played against Mike, stars that played against LeBron, they're like, Mike was a better ball player for a lot of different reasons. Not just was he the best offensive player and defensive player, but his mentality, his competitiveness, how he can dominate at the end of the game, how he is at his best when it matters most, right? Mike has the edge when it comes to that. He does. Here's a fourth point. The 80s. The 80s was a golden age of basketball as far as from the 80s until now. The Celtics and Lakers went to every single finals. All 10, not every year, but one of those two teams went to every single NBA finals from 1980 to 89. What two teams have done that since in the NBA? What? Golden State Warriors had a nice run, but they're not going to be in the finals every single year for a 10-year span. And two teams. So when they're like, oh, Mike lost in the first round this many times, he had the Celtics to go through. And then somehow, if they didn't face the Celtics in the East, Mike, he had the bad boys. And I want you to think about this. The Lakers had 4 or 5 Hall of Famers each year during the 80s. Kareem, Magic, James Worthy, Jamal Wilkes, and then Bob McAdoo coming off the bench, who's a Hall of Famer. Celtics, Parrish, McHale, Bird, DJ, Bill Walton, all Hall of Famers, 5 right there. And Danny Ainge was a solid player as well. Those teams were stacked. And we're like, oh, super teams. Those teams were made from the draft and also trades, but it wasn't from superstars saying, I got to go to that team because that's my only chance to win. The stars of today are a lot different than years ago. And I'm not saying they don't want to compete today, but stars back then said, and I heard Vince Carter say this. They asked him, why don't you go to a team where you can win the championship again? He's like, I want to compete. I want to go at these guys. I want to go at Dominique Wilkins. I want to go at Reggie Miller. I want to go at Bird. I want to go at Magic. And now there's like, oh, let me join. Come on, Anthony Davis, come over here. Come on, Chris Paul, or I got to go somewhere else. And that's a huge difference between Mike and LeBron. Michael, after losing 3 straight years, and that's the other team. Detroit Pistons, 4 Hall of Famers on that squad, from Adrian Dantley, Joe Dumars, Dennis Rodman, Isaiah Thomas. So when people are like, oh, Michael lost this many times in the first round, who was he playing against in the East compared to LeBron? There were not, give me 2 teams with a stack of Hall of Famers in the East during Mike's era and LeBron's era. Please do. The Detroit Pistons, solid team. Chauncey should be a Hall of Famer, but then Ben Wallace won't be. Maybe Rasheed Wallace, maybe Rip Hamilton. I don't think they will be. That was his toughest competition through the East for a number of years. The Celtics, I'll give you that. But KG was older. Paul Pierce was probably at his prime. But Ray Allen and KG were older, definite Hall of Famers, and Paul Pierce, three Hall of Famers. I will give you that. I will give you that. Like, oh, LeBron faced the Celtics, but with 3 Hall of Famers. Pistons, you got 4. Celtics, you got 5. And that's just in the East. Then if Mike somehow got there, you would have the Lakers to face. And by the way, I would put money that the Los Angeles Lakers during the 80s would beat the Golden State Warriors. Kareem's better than whoever they had put up on center. Magic's a better point guard than Steph. James Worthy's better than Draymond Green. James Worthy, can you imagine him in today's era with no big men? That stretch 4. The Lakers were called Showtime. So if you want to play fast Golden State, the Lakers are just as good, better actually, than Golden State. And if you slow it down, play in an area where you could hand check with 2 hands. Steph will be on the bench with foul trouble, Magic posting him up. Kareem's, he's bodying up whoever, worthy. The Lakers would beat the Warriors. I'll give the Warriors 2 games in a 7-game series, but Durant's going to get his. He's going to get his. But as a team, the Lakers would destroy Golden State in a series. They would. So that's a huge point. And LeBron, you know, I can't give him, I'm trying to be unbiased, but like if he went in that era, yeah, he's going to lose in the first round too. So when I hear people, oh, Mike lost in the first round, who cares? It's the first round. What did you do when you got into the finals? Mike dominated every single time. LeBron, he's 4-6. He's 4-6 for a reason. It's because he doesn't dominate every single game and every single series. He has a teammate that called him a quitter. And by the way, when I saw him in his first go around with Cleveland, if you're the star player, even Magic Johnson, Mike, you have that ball in your hands at the end of the game. I saw versus Celtics, last few minutes of the game, he's in the corner. And it gets bounced, right? They lose. Orlando Magic, same thing. He's having Mo Williams handle the rock. But I'm looking at his body language. And that's another area I'm going to go into in a second. You're the best player on the court. You demand the ball and get the ball in your hands. And I see why that could be looked at as quitting. It's when your teammate says that about you, that speaks volumes. And they would never say that about Mike. They would never say that about Kobe, ever. And I wouldn't want to play with a guy who is perceived as a quitter. I wouldn't. So here's the 5th point. Like I said, Mike, beginning his career, didn't have much help, just like LeBron, right? But who did Larry Bird call him God in basketball shoes, 2nd year in the league? And Larry Bird's winning 3 straight MVPs in the 80s. Magic, he's like Mike. Mike was the best player, but he just didn't have the horses. You can't say that about LeBron, his entire career in his prime. Kobe was a better ball player than him. So if you're not even the best player in your era, how could you be considered the greatest of all time? Mike was always the best player from his 2nd year in the league to the 98 in Chicago. The best. People have debates like, oh, I would take Durant. I would take Kawhi. LeBron is a great ball player, but there was never a debate who's the best player playing in your prime. And they do that with LeBron. And Kobe was a better as a teammate. I'm taking Kobe. And I think it's disrespectful to Kobe, not even, like, oh, it's LeBron versus Mike. Who would these stars take as your teammate? And if it's about win, and I asked one of my buddies, 2 of them, one of them played at DePaul for college basketball. The other one is a buddy of mine. He's an athlete. I said, who would you rather play with, Mike or LeBron? They're like, I would play with LeBron. I was like, why? Oh, we're going to get the ball. And then when I said, well, what if you want to win? Immediately, both of them said, I got Mike. And that's a huge difference. Huge difference. Who do you want there in the trenches with you every single night when it matters most, when you want to win? And people are going to say Mike. People are going to say Kobe. Kobe, when they beat the Celtics, Game 7, I'll never forget, he shot 6 for 24, and people are like, oh, man, he had a terrible game. The guy had 17 rebounds. And that's another huge difference between Mike and LeBron, is that they will do anything it takes to win, Mike and Kobe. LeBron, he doesn't do that consistently. 8 points for J.J. Barea, outplayed by Dirk in the finals. And people will say KD outplayed him. Kawhi outplayed him. And that's another huge criteria when you're talking about these 2 ball players, right? Another point I got. Here's the difference between Mike and LeBron. You saw it in a documentary. Mike loses versus the Bad Boys 3 straight years. He says right after they lose, let's go. All of us, we're going into the weight room. We're going to get physically stronger. So not only our mentality is stronger to face these guys, but we need to add some muscle. so our bodies could take this punishment. The styles of leadership and the will to win at all costs. LeBron left. He had it. He's like, I'm gonna go to Miami. And Mike already was a winner. He was a winner at North Carolina. He had that winning mentality. LeBron was not a winner. Why do I know that? Because that first finals versus the Mavs, his teammate said he quit on them. Where did LeBron learn how to be a winner? Pat Riley and Dwayne Wade. They were winners. They taught LeBron how to win. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Michael Jordan had to learn how to trust his teammates, but he never had to be taught how to be a winner. And when you say what's another huge difference, Mike was always a winner. LeBron had to be taught he was taught how to win by Pat Riley and Dwayne Wade. Huge difference. But Mike said, let's go. We're going to get in the weight room. We're going to destroy the bad boys. LeBron's like, I'm going to jump ship. And I think and no matter what job you have, you should choose where you want to be employed at, where you want to work at, right? But LeBron's like, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, hey, let's team up. Mike would never do that. Mike would never say, oh, you know what, I'm going to join the bad boys because they, a weak move like Kevin Durant. Bad boys beat me 3 straight times. Let me jump ship and go to the bad boys, or let me call up Karl Malone and John Stockton and join them in Utah, so then I could beat the bad boys, right? That's a huge difference. Another huge difference between these two. When the stakes were the highest, Michael plays even better. There's never been a player that I've seen in basketball, and I've been watching since Mike until now, that when the stakes are highest, just for basketball, a team sport, Tom Brady, by the way, is another guy who fits in the MJ category when it comes to this. When the stakes are highest, Mike plays even at a higher level. And LeBron's not like that consistently every year in the playoffs, in the finals, right? You look at the Mavs, people will say Kawhi outplayed him, KD outplayed him. Excuse me. But when it matters most, Mike 6-0 in the finals, never allowed a game 7. And like I said, that's not the only criteria that he's 6-0, LeBron's 4-6. Because guess what? Mike could have gotten there miraculously getting by 5 Hall of Famers versus Celtics in the 80s, 4 Hall of Famers or 5 Hall of Famers with the bad boys, and then got there and lost versus the Lakers. So it's not just the 6-0, but the 6-0 speaks volumes because when he got there, he dominated the other superstars, dominated the other team. He left it highest points per game in the finals history, 41 versus the Phoenix Suns. Didn't matter what superstar he was facing, what team he was facing, his level of play would be elevated every time. And LeBron's not like that every time. He hasn't been over his career. And I think that's another huge difference between the two of them. I kind of mentioned already the rules and style of play. The rules and style of play, like it's a different game. These fouls that are called today, these phantom, the flopping, you got your arm out and they just rip, it's not a shooting motion when I jump my body forward into a defender and shoot it, right? I teach my guys to get a rebound, you chin it, your elbow's out, and you could pivot. Today in NBA, they call fouls if you chin it and you pivot and your elbow hits the guy. Granted, they're trying to do stuff for safety, but the rules of today have gotten out of hand. It really favors the offensive players, not just in football, but in basketball, right? And it's a huge difference, the rules of today from back then. And it's not enjoyable. I don't want to see a free throw shooting competition. James Naismith, he invented a game of basketball, so it's free flowing, very few stoppages. I remember watching North Carolina versus Gonzaga in the national championship and texting my dad. I'm like, this game is so not enjoyable. It should be, and we've done this in society. We've gone from one extreme to the other. It shouldn't be where the bad boys is, but it shouldn't be like today. It should be somewhere in the middle. And we've done that in all areas of society where, well, you know what? Let's give out trophies to everybody. And the research shows it hurts kids. It doesn't build resiliency, right? We could build up kids' self-esteem in other ways. So we just go from one extreme to the other, and we do this in sports and we do this in life. We need a little common ground, and that's a huge factor as well with LeBron and Mike, the eras and style play. And I can't penalize LeBron, but when 20 GM and coaches say Mike would average 45 in today's game, he would. No hand check, no rim protection, small ball. Mike, 4'3", 40 time, 48-inch vertical leap, strong hand. And his coaches and players back then, they would talk about how strong Michael Jordan was and how strong his hands were. And LeBron, if you look at him, you're like, yeah, he's stronger than Mike. Well, I don't know. Mike had that wiry strength, and he was that strong. And this isn't my opinion. These are coaches and players that coached him, coached against him, played with him, played against him. They talk about how strong Michael Jordan was and how strong his hands were. So imagine him in today's game with no big men, no rim protection, no hand check. You go to the basket, you get lightly touched, you don't get clotheslined by the bad boys. He would. Some other things between the two of them. Mike in his 40s, with the Washington Wizards, he breaks his streak. He only gets 8 points because Doug Collins sits him out, starting in the third quarter, and gets on the bus or the flight and asks Doug Collins, "Do you think I can still play?" And Doug Collins is like, "Yeah, I still believe in you, Mike." They get in like 3 o'clock in the morning from their flight, right? And Doug Collins shows up at the gym 7:30 in the morning. Mike's drenched in sweat. And LeBron, from what I hear, is a very, very hard worker. Very hard. They say he's the hardest worker in the game. Mike was when he played. Kobe was when he played. Phil Jackson said that Kobe worked out harder than Mike, which is crazy. But to be the best, it's 90% perspiration and 10% inspiration. It's that work. But Mike scores 50 points, and then the next game after that scores 45. And this is in his 40s. This is against other superstars of the 2000s that are supposedly better athletes and better players. I'll go into that in a second. But think about that. That was his mentality. And that goes into the next point is their mentality and competitiveness. Who's better with their mentality and competitiveness? Mike. They say what they call it, the Mamba mentality. Mike had the same, Mike and Kobe were cut from the same cloth. They would not say that about LeBron. Yeah, is he competitive? Not like Mike, not like Kobe. If the media was saying stuff, Clyde Drexler, he's Mike and Clyde Drexler, they just as good. Mike destroyed him. MVP to Karl Malone, Mike destroyed him. Any little motivation, Mike didn't need motivation, but you just gave him a little more motivation, he will destroy you. And that's that mentality, that's that competitiveness. And people are like, he used to take out different athletes out for dinner. I heard somebody say the reason he did that is that he wanted you at your best. So when he played you and beat you the next day, there was no excuse. They're like, they lost to him because they friends with him. No, Mike wanted you at your best. This is what reporters would say about Mike. This is what other players would say about Mike, that, yeah, he went out to dinner, but the next day he's trying to step on your throat. If he up 30, he's trying to get to 40. And I think it was in a documentary. Yeah, it was. And Scottie Pippen's like, if the other team was smiling and laughing, shaking hands before the game, Mike was in his mind saying, we about to bust them. We about to bust them by 40 or 50. And Mike was cold-blooded. And that's a huge difference between Mike and LeBron, that competitiveness, that mentality. And like I said, Tom Brady, talking about being at your best when it matters most fourth quarter comebacks, most game-winning drives, right, in the playoffs and the Super Bowls. And, Tom, and I hear this a lot. They're like, because they're not athletic, it does, or they're a better athlete. It makes them a better, they have better physical attributes as far as being an athlete, like running and speed and jumping a bit. Therefore, they are better than that person who's not as fast, can't jump as high. If you say, all right, who do you want to take you down for game-winning Super Bowl drive? Most people will say Joe Montana and Tom Brady. They weren't Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers or Lamar Jackson today, great athletes. And that's one of the things that I think people are missing, is that it's not just those physical attributes. It's that winning mentality all the time. I'm going to win at all costs, that competitiveness, that fire, that mentality. And Mike has it over LeBron. He has always had that. LeBron had to learn how to be a winner from Pat Riley and Dwayne Wade. And Mike had to learn how to trust his teammates. But who would I rather want? I want a guy who knows how to be a winner and is a winner all the time, not sometimes. Here's the other thing. Mike and Kobe, only guys to three-peat since Bill Russell. Mike three-peated twice. LeBron, and Mike even said, Mike always measured himself against Bird and Magic. He even said, he's like, I want to do something that Magic and Larry never did it. He goes, I want to three-peat, because they never did it. And if Mike knew that if LeBron came before Mike and they were comparing him and they said LeBron won 3 titles, Mike would have made sure he won 4 or 5 in a row. Or LeBron played in, and that is a huge difference between the two, is that Mike will just show you, I'm the best, without saying it. Their humbleness was very different too. You know, Mike was asked, who's the best player of all time? People say, are you? He's like, I didn't get a chance to play against those other guys from the other eras. LeBron, after winning Cleveland, is like, I'm the best of all time. You know, their humbleness, Mike had that inner cockiness, and he's going to submit his will and show everybody, no matter what superstar he's playing against, if it's in the finals, it's in the playoffs, he's going to show who the best player is. But that three-peat, think about that. Kobe, Mike, since Bill Russell. In the history of basketball, Mike did it twice. Here's another one, body language separates the two of them. What do I mean by that? LeBron looks great when he's winning, when they're winning in a series, they're winning in a game. He looks great. He's rah-rah with his teammates. But when they're losing, his body language changes. When I saw him versus Celtics, his first run in Cleveland versus Orlando, I could tell on his body language, I'm ready to go in the off season. And even when he was taught how to win by Riley and Dwayne Wade, remember that J.R. Smith blunder? He catches the ball. Roll the tape, go to YouTube. Watch LeBron's body language on the bench. He was so mad and looked defeated. And guess what? As a leader, people look at you. Mike would have been like, he would have been like, what the F are you doing? But then he's like, let's go, guys. He goes, we got this in overtime. LeBron's body language, he looks defeated. And that's a huge factor. Tom Brady down 25 for Atlanta Falcons. After the game, like, how'd you do it? He's like, all his teammates are like, man, you should see Tom Brady in the huddle. He's like, we got this, guys, one play at a time. LeBron's not like that when it comes to being down or a little adversity. Mike outdoes him in that area. He does. You know, like I said already, when 17 point per game average versus the Mavs in the finals, 8 points for JJ Barea. What would Mike and Kobe have done in that finals, right? Here's another point though. Mike never had 2 teammates on 2 different teams that could average 20 for a season, for a series. In Cleveland, he had Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving. Who did Mike had Scotty. Scotty could get you 20, but he didn't even average 20 points for his career. In most playoff series, he didn't average 20. Now, was he the best wing defender? Sure. But then LeBron also had, look at Miami. he had Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, two teams with two other teammates that are giving you 20 every night. So when people are like, oh, well, Mike, he couldn't do the things that LeBron could do, he could, and I'll get to that in a second, is that Mike had to score 40 and 50 points a lot of games because he didn't have that offensive help, okay? Mike, you put Mike or Kobe on that Miami team, they going 4 out of 4. Can LeBron take a team, maybe, you know, bring them there? When you get there, Mike's going to put you over the top every time. LeBron, he'll have a meltdown of the Mavs, maybe get outplayed by Kawhi or KD. He's not consistent, but like, I want you to think about it. Michael Jordan with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh playing those 4 opponents, he's going 4 out of 4 titles. LeBron with 2 out of 4. That confidence, and this goes back to the mentality. Whose confidence was higher? And that cockiness where I remember hearing a story, Byron Scott, he was with LA and he was in a training room and Mike's like, what's going on? He's like, I'm not playing. Mike's like, who's starting in your place? Anthony Peeler. He's like, oh, put me down for 50. And that's how Mike was. He's like, this guy right here is checking me. And that's what he would have done versus JJ Barea. I want you to think about that. 8 points he in his 40s with Washington, he would drop 40 versus him. Huge difference between those two. And let's look at each aspect of the game, and it will end there. Scoring. Well, you give it to Mike. But, you know, people look at, well, LeBron's going to be the all-time leading scorer, right? Great. Total points. It speaks to his longevity of his career, staying healthy. But Mike, amount of scoring titles versus LeBron, right? How they could score, you give the advantage to Mike. Defense. That's another area that Mike blows LeBron out of the water. Defensive player of the year. Look how many times he was all league first team defense. Even 98 with the Bulls. He was first team all defense last year with the Bulls. Best offensive player in the court, best defensive player in the court. Not my opinion, but Jalen Rose and other people that played against him in the NBA said the same thing, right? And I think I saw a stat. Michael Jordan was like the only guy ever to get 150 blocks and 150 steals in the same season. Only guy ever. Other things. Mid-range jump shot, right? You're going to give it to Mike. Athleticism. You know, people are like, well, LeBron looks bigger, so therefore he's a better athlete. I don't know. Going off of what coaches, what players, how they speak about Michael Jordan. He ran a 4.340, 40-inch vertical leap, quickest first step. And when I hear people saying, well, look how he's blown by these guys back in the 80s and 90s, because he was Russell Westbrook, a few inches taller, that much. He could jump higher, faster, quicker, stronger. So you see Westbrook and just put that on steroids, and that was Mike. And it's not a debate who's a better athlete, but when people are like, well, LeBron's bigger, therefore he's a better athlete. And I just want to bring up the fact, what do the coaches and other players say about Mike, speaking about him as an athlete, okay? And speaking of athletes, they're like, well, because you're a better athlete as far as physical tools, that makes you better. And I want to bring up, look at Tim Duncan, Mr. Fundamentals. Wasn't the highest leaper, didn't, you know, right? He wasn't the quickest guy, didn't run the fastest up and down. But when you talk about who's one of the best power forwards of all time, his name's going to get mentioned. Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, they're not super athletic, but guess what? They are great basketball players. Tom Brady, Peyton Manning. And there's more than just physical tools that make you a great athlete. It's your mentality, it's your heart, it's your toughness, it's your will to win. It's all those attributes that analytics and data don't give you, okay? Some other things, rebounding. Yeah, LeBron is probably, you know, he has a higher career rebound average. I saw Mike, he had 69 points versus the Cavs in regular season. I was watching the YouTube of him, and he had 18 rebounds that game. And when you talk about passing, rebounding and passing, people will say, well, LeBron is better than Mike in that area because of statistics, right? But in 1989, I believe, 1989, Michael Jordan was point guard for 11 games. He had 10 triple doubles in 11 games when he was asked to play point guard. Scottie took away those things from Mike. And yeah, people will give, most people are like, oh, and I think LeBron's passing ability, like his vision, is better than Jordan. But as far as like statistics, and that's why I said, like, don't just go off statistics. And because, well, he's better in this area, and he got more career things than this. So what? I mean, Derek Jeter's one of the best Yankees of all time, not because he had great statistics in the regular season. What do you do in the postseason? What do you do in a World Series? Right? So that is something I want to bring up. Now, weaknesses. Michael's probably only weakness was his three-point shooting, 32% career average. LeBron's only 34% career average. That's a wash. But think about other LeBron's weaknesses. Foul shooting, mid-range. Michael and Kobe were the best mid-range shooters of all time, back to the basket or mid-range in general. That's a LeBron weakness. If I was coaching against LeBron, I would tell my guys, hand up, but we'll live with him shooting three-pointers and mid-range jump shots. And then when he gets to the basket, foul him, because he shoots 68, 69% from the free throw line. That's not Michael Jordan's weaknesses. And so these are the major things that I see with the two of them when I really break them down. But at the end of the day, did they dominate in their era? Did they change the rules because of him? Michael, that's a checkbox. There's no such thing as LeBron rules. There's the Jordan rules. Secondly, did you dominate the superstars in your era? Did you dominate them? Michael dominated every single superstar. LeBron hasn't when it's mattered the most. 3 was winning. When you got there, what did you do? And the winning is not the end all be all, because Aaron Rodgers only got 1 Super Bowl. He's one of the best QBs of all time, right? In his era, football, you got 3 sides of the ball, right? Defense, offense, and special teams. So championships is not the end all be all. Statistics is not the end all be all. But when you talk about who do you want game on the line, who do you want an entire series, who do you want in crunch time, you want Mike. You want to win a game, you want to win a ring, you want Mike. And LeBron's a winner. He got 4 titles, but not like Mike. So those are the major things that I see the difference. And just don't look at all statistics, because the eras are different. The rules are different. And I also want people to realize that there's some ex-players out there that really get left off the table. Jerry West, I think he only got one title. Who is he going against every year? He's going against the Celtics, right? And finals MVP in the finals when he lost. And going back to statistics, Pete Maravich, they said they looked at film. He averaged 44 points a game in college without the 3-point line. They said if they had the 3-point line, he would have averaged, he made about 8 or 10 threes a game. So that bumps him up to 54 points a game. So when you look at statistics, don't just look at the data. Look at, well, they didn't have a 3-point line back then. You could hand check guys with 2 hands. The rules are different. So I think we need to judge people off their eras and not say, well, they're the greatest because of X, Y, and Z. They didn't have the opportunity to compete against them. And number 2, the rules of today, it slants to the offense. So hopefully you enjoy this. I try to be as unbiased as I can. Like I said, I think LeBron's great, but even if he gets to 6 titles, he's not Michael Jordan. And I didn't even speak to how he's made basketball global. Michael made basketball global. I heard Will Chamberlain say when he being interviewed, he's like, the players of today should give Michael Jordan a cut of their money to Mike, because of how he's how he's made the game today. Bird and Magic, right? They kind of brought years ago. It was tape delay. They would play the finals and then play it later. Magic and Bird made basketball popular, right? College championship, and then in the NBA, and then Mike just brought it over the top and made it that much more popular, not just in the U.S. but worldwide. Hope you enjoy this, and let me know what you think.